It's time for Pure Performance.
Get your stopwatches ready. It's time for Pure Performance with Andy Grabner and Brian Wilson. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Pure Performance. My name is Brian Wilson, and sometimes my co-host goes by Andreas Grabner, but you and I know him as Andy Grabner. Andy, I wanted to change it up there. So.
I know, it's amazing. Yeah, completely different.
Completely different. And now for something completely different. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I'm good, but I just wonder because I know our guest is already listening in and he was hoping this to be a fun conversation. And you told him that we are really always very funny, but I'm really not sure if we are currently cutting it.
I think I was being sarcastic about my dumb jokes, my dad jokes.
I didn't get that.
I saw a great meme yesterday. Was someone posted in Slack. It was like, I keep all my dad jokes in the database.
It was not too bad.
That was amazing. Anyway,
I want to do one more. I had a feeling today. I got a feeling that you and our guests will have a lot to talk about because I think you are not only kind of you lived in the same area in the United States for a while, so you share a lot of like the same places you went, but obviously music is connecting you too.
Yep.
I feel there's going to be a lot to talk about music. And kind of one of the musicians that you always, admire me for, I think because I live in the country where he came from, Falco, our big Falco. We can finally talk about
Falco without being awkward.
Exactly. True. And with this strange segue, I'm not sure if this makes any sense to anybody who's listening now, but I want to hand over to our guest and let him introduce himself. Dan, how are you?
Hello, everyone. First off, Brian, I'm a big fan of all your music with the Beach Boys. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Good work. Andy, pleasure. Thanks for having me on. My name is Dan Papandrea. People call me Pop. I am the director of open source community and ecosystem for a company called Systig, and I work on the open source project, a CNCF incubator project called Falco, which also is the name of an amazing German, Austrian.
That was close.
There we go. Woo. Okay, settled. Austrian musician.
I can go into a whole bunch of German. There's only two Austrian musicians that I know of that are very well known: Falco and Mozart, right?
Mozart. But they're both on the same scale in terms of how awesome.
Yeah, is Beethoven Austrian, or is he just spent a lot of time there?
He's not known. And also, okay. Mozart, we all Austrians, we know that he's Austrian, but I think there's also a debate back in the days when he lived in Salzburg, whether it was truly Austria, or it was part of whatever political situation they had back there. But
just claim him as yours. It's like the debate where it's the Statue of Liberty. The Statue of Liberty is in New Jersey, but New York claims it. But just claim it.
Yeah. I mean, the Italians, we grabbed pasta. That was noodles from the Chinese. I mean, we took it. That's how you have to do it. That's it. Yeah. And by the way, you should definitely talk about those amazing, like, chocolates you all have in Austria. Oh my God! Like I talk to Alyssa about that all the time. I'm like, dude, can you ship me some? Because they're called Mozarts. Can you explain to the listeners about these things? They're most crazy things.
Yeah, Mozartkugeln. So Mozartkugel, literally translated, means Mozart balls, but not Mozart's balls, because they would be really probably not that delicious. But it's basically round balls, and I think they're filled with nougat, and it's just fantastic. They have different layers, and there's also a debate on who invented them and what is the original factory and the original store. But you get them in the city of Salzburg, and you get them pretty much everywhere now. But they are delicious. And as you said, if you go to Vienna, the Sachertorte, which is very famous from the Sacher Hotel, chocolate cake. But
all guests of the Pure Performance Podcast will get some of these Mozart balls. Tune in, everyone. Tune in.
Exactly. Okay, so how did we end up here? I don't remember, but what I want to talk about is now. So Dan, you talk about Falco. I think the way, I guess, how do you pronounce it? Falco.
Falco. Yeah. I mean, it's so the name derivation, right? It means hawk in Italian. And It's basically, if you look at it, it's a runtime security project where kind of the de facto Kubernetes threat engine detection tool. And what it does is there's three elements to it. There's you tap into the kernel, right? So it functions through eBPF or kernel mod probe, and you look at all these system calls. And these system calls then have a second component, which you can basically create a rule set through YAML to be able to say, oh, okay, somebody terminaled the container. That's a system call. Somebody touched a file. Files are system calls. Networks are system calls. All of those things. And you have this, this DSL, this language for you to, again, create these rules. And then they can output that and alert to things like standard out, JSON, HTTP. And then you can even add what we call something like a contributor, which I love, is awesome in our community, contributed something called Falco Sidekick. And then you can extend it to downstream projects like Knative, CI/CD projects, Kepton as an example as well. I know that I'm talking to the team about that. So there's some really cool things you can do with it. And we love the growth that's happened. I mean, when we were incubating, I think we were at 8.1 or 8.5 million Docker pulls. As of this morning, I think we're at 26 or something billion Docker pulls. And the reason is again, it's this great engine from a runtime security perspective that works in a cloud native context. And I'm so happy about this amazing community we've built.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Andy, I got to point out, Andy, he mentioned Captain before you did.
Exactly.
So Andy always mentions Captain at some point in the show. And
big fan. So
the other thing I want to touch upon is the appropriateness of the name Falco, right? So the Falcon idea with security makes perfect sense, but just rounding them out, and we'll drop the other Falco right after this. But Falco had the big hit there, Kommissar, which I believe that's like the police or the secret police or something, Andy, right? And that's all tied to security. So I think you have a double well-named product. And congratulations on all the on the downloads. That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. And just even the contribution's been fantastic. In terms about the origins of the project, it was basically where worked for a company called Sysdig, and Sysdig again is a kind of a secure DevOps platform. There's monitoring capabilities, troubleshooting, and runtime capability because of tapping into that kernel module or kernel capability I talked about earlier. And so Loris, our founder, was one of the guys that, if you're all familiar with like Wireshark or TCP dump, he's one of the co-creators of it, right? And so like taking that pedigree of being able to digest all of that data, like network level data and whatever, and doing it in this thing from the Sysdig perspective, customers were like, you could probably do a ton with security here. So I remember the summer before he took a summer off, and he basically created this thing called Falco, and we've had like a ton of amazing maintainers that have grew the thing out. Chris Nova was a contributor to the project as well. Leo and Lorenzo Fontana, Leo Di Donato, great maintainers of the group, and basically they've written books on eBPF. So and now I love seeing, you see all these projects are now using eBPF, and we were like contributors to eBPF early because we knew the promise that it has, because it's so for the listeners, eBPF is enhanced Berkeley packet filtering, and it allows you to kind of tap into, instead of having to do an upstream update to the kernel to add these kind of helper applications, so you can create these applications on the fly. It's such a great technology, not only for security perspective, but monitoring and networking. You see projects like Cilium. You see projects there's a ton of projects using eBPF. It's the kind of the long or the short of that.
Mm-hmm. Hey, and just out of curiosity, because I haven't looked into Falco yet, that means, in a nutshell, if I understand it, you are observing events and you have a pattern definition, and you basically are watching for patterns. And then if certain patterns come up, like, hey, nobody should touch this file from this particular container, then you are generating an alert or another event, I guess, that is then exposed.
Well, one step you missed was the rules part of it, right? Because of all those system calls, right? You have this language that you can basically check for things like privilege escalation, namespace age. We seeded from the community 100 rules out of the box, and they'd be specific to syscall level, also kube audit. So if somebody created a namespace they shouldn't have, you'll get notified. There'll be a notification, and that's where then you can output that to that's why I mentioned Falco Sidekick, because now you have a pretty little snazzy UI, and you have one Helm chart, literally one Helm deployment, and you have all those three components: Falco Sidekick, Falco Sidekick UI, and you can create your rules, test your rules, deploy it in your cluster, those types of things.
Mm-hmm. And then again, I'm curious because that means if I'm a developer and I want to test this out, or whoever, who is the target persona in your case? A security DevSecOps engineer, security engineer, or is it the architect, the developer? Who is the target audience?
It's all of them. And the rationale is like, it's not so much for security issues, it's also for somebody to kind of, test out their code. If we look at this, misconfiguration in security has cost the industry almost $5 trillion. And that could be, things like cloud, like, S3 buckets being open. It could be things like, in this container, I use this Nginx container that I've grabbed from the cloud. Mm-hmm. I'm grabbed from a registry and I brought into I brought this thing into the pod. Look, there's, you can use things like, OPA and have those policy queries to say, okay, I don't want this to run a root. Well, what happens when something at runtime is there and it's running and it's post kind of, so for software supply chain, when it's in a runtime perspective, somebody gets in there and they drop their payload and then they can do whatever they want. That's the problem. There's no real notification function beyond Falco out there.
Mm-hmm. Shouldn't you then also talk with the registry providers of the world, whether it's a Docker Hub or whoever public registries, before things get uploaded? Did you really do the check as part of that process?
I've done a lot of cloud security podcasts recently, and I can tell you one tool is not going to fix everything. You need a kind of amalgamation of many tools. So you need something that's doing vulnerability management. You need something that's doing benchmarking on the underlying rules, because guess what? Kubernetes and cloud native is not just one thing. It's basically, think about it. It's the underlying, let's say if I'm using a cloud provider, if I'm deploying an AWS, right? I have this EC2 instance, or I'm using EKS, great. I'm already kind of have those checks and balances in place. I might be having ECR scan some things, but maybe there's some things I want to have from a policy perspective where maybe my application needs to have this level of access. But then when it runs, and if it goes outside it from a deviation perspective, I need something from a runtime security perspective. Mm-hmm. So there's tools out there. There's commercial tools, right? Sysdig is one of them, that allows you to kind of have this full platform then it uses things like runtime security elements in Falco, or Prometheus, or some of the underlying open source technologies that are out there.
And coming back to I'm a developer, and I can basically, my development environment, I deploy. You said you have a Helm chart where you, on the one side, you deploy what's it, a sidecar, or how does this work? How do I get the data from? So
the underlying thing is that kernel level tap that's there, that's on a per node basis. So what happens is it taps into user space. So you can tap into eBPF to do that. Yeah. And then that presents itself to this pod, a Falco pod that's running on per host basis. But I'm not having to introspect anything in the direct pods, right? I'm not having to do any of that because it's doing it at the host level.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then from at the host level, those are system calls that are happening because that container and pod is making those system calls, and then the host is running those container calls, and there's network calls and the host level calls. So you have that amalgamation. So I don't have to introspect anything directly into the pod or inject anything in my code. So I get this like visibility there. Yeah.
And then the policies, where are they enforced? Is there a central component where all these events are streamed to?
Yeah, that's the Falco. So basically, there's the Falco pod has those in there. So like again, it's, if you look at it from that perspective, Falco pod has taps into the user space. Then those rules get injected as part of that from an architecture perspective, and then those outputs are done. So it's basically saying, okay, this syscall that tells me somebody has an exec shell. Okay, I want to get notified of it if it's not like part of like a known, like a macro we have is for known things. But the beauty of this, it's YAML. So like, I don't have to learn, like, there's certain conventions, but it's YAML, right? I can say, okay, the file descriptor here is /user share Nginx. I want to know everything that's in user share Nginx. If there's any deviation from it, go ahead and send me an alert. And I want it to go to this thing. And I want it to just be this description. And I want it to have the metadata. So it's going to tell you, oh, it's this pod and this cluster and this place. Like you said, from a developer's perspective, I got to find that needle in the haystack. How can I do that? Well, the surest place to me is the kernel.
Yeah.
Interesting. We're all learning a lot more about security these days, especially us over here at Dynatrace. And as I try to wrap my head around more of it, I know there are certain overarching segments of security. You have like risk, SIEM, and I forget the other two major ones. Where does this fall in that scheme, or is this a whole new sort of way of looking at things if we were to categorize it?
Falco specific to runtime, right? And so Falco basically runs at runtime, but also when you talk about SIMs, right, those are just, it's signals that you're providing to your SIM, right? Mm-hmm. So I talked earlier about CAS benchmarking, vulnerability management, all of those. That SIM has to concat all those signals. The signals that Falco provides is very specific to just runtime stuff, right? Mm-hmm. So, one of the things we have is we actually had somebody, like the community has contributed a couple of blogs. If you go to, by the way, everybody, if you're listening to this, I'm sure there'll be liner notes to this, but falco.org, we have a blog, and somebody's created this thing where it's called a response engine. And there's 5 different things where they're tapping into things like Argo CD or like Knative or OpenFOSS or those types of things. And basically, so I told you about that scenario where somebody terminals into a container, right? Well, I want to respond to that. I don't want to get notified. I don't want to send it to my SIM to respond to it. Maybe I want to be able to create something where the response is from a function. So I have a function that deletes the pod if it happens. Because what happens? Somebody comes into that pod. The beauty of Kubernetes is it respawns the pod after it's killed, right? So like you're knocking that person out. You get that thing.
Wow. So it's basically an auto remediation. You're basically triggering a remediation function, and whether this is calling a Lambda function or whether it's calling an Argo workflow or a anything. Yeah,
but the beauty of this is it's any function you can imagine. That's the beauty of this, right? So you can create a function for just about anything. Like you said, Lambda, it could be anything. I seen somebody do this, and I thought this was amazing. I did a talk with somebody, and all my talks this year have been about cookies and runtime. It's like you need the right ingredients for runtime security, right? That was my gist, but I use different technologies each time I do it. And so we did one where it was basically like, Falco tapping into just GKE. Right, underlying like the things and like some of the functions there. We had it run a function that actually did a Kubernetes network policy change. So basically, when it saw that somebody terminaled in, it took any of the ability for them to go egress out. So it's like, okay, cool. You can do whatever you want. If you think about some of these scenarios, right? SolarWinds last year, right? Somebody dropped their payload and then they sent it to external network connections and they, they dropped in a file. Those 2 things I talked about earlier, system calls. When you touch something in a file system, that is a system call. When you do a network connection, that's a system call. And so that's the beauty of this thing. So you can now have that level of introspection.
So, I guess I'm not familiar with eBPF enough, but I assume there's a ton of events getting generated, especially in large environments with heavy load. So what volume of events are we talking about that then Falco needs to process?
Well, again, because the rule sets are here, it's only digesting the things that matter that are specific to rules. But like that's the thing we've built into this to be able to have this, syscall, being able to like have that threshold for that. It's built into the process. It's I always get that question. Well, with all of that, like there must be a lot of, you're running a lot. It's resource intensive. They're running in huge environments. Even from the largest like Sysdig perspective as well. It's enterprise scale, but in terms of Falco itself, it's pretty amazing the amount of like very low overhead that you wouldn't have get from other conventions, like having to tap into like LD preload or any of those functions.
So what I was saying is, if I understand this correctly from an overhead perspective, you said somebody that defines the rules defines them in the YAML file. The YAML file is actually then being passed on to eBPF into the kernel.
That's a Falco. It's part of the Falco process, right? Okay. It's just digesting those things that are happening from the kernel, right? Yeah. And we're just tapping into user space to be able to then use the Falco rules to be able to digest. Okay, this thing happened, right? So the rules are just kind of a disseminator of the data.
Okay, so that means you still observe all the events that are coming in, and then you run it through your rules engine. That's great.
Right.
Yeah, and then obviously the rules engine, you said they are on a host basis. And do you manage those rules centrally and then push them out again in case there are updates, or how does that work?
it's a daemon set, right? So it's, Helm, you update the Helm chart, it's a YAML file. Like you can have custom rules, and we have the out of the box rules that are there. But again, if you all want to take a look at more of the, the details there, it's right on, falco.org.
Yeah. Really cool. I really like one thing you said before we started the podcast. You said, and hopefully I wrote this down correctly, but you said what Kubernetes has contributed to computing, we want Falco to contribute to security.
Let me clarify that. It's what we believe that, what Kubernetes is the distributed computing, Falco should be the runtime security.
Yeah.
And one of the things I will tell you this, we did a donation recently, and Sysdig did to the Falco libs. There's 2 libs that we use, something called libscap and linsp, C++ libraries. Yeah. Anybody now can use those libraries to have that dissemination to create even better security projects that are out there. This took X amount of people hours, X amount of programming time to create this. Somebody coming out of the box right now that wants to have a start can use the Falco libs right now. And we have examples of that being able to do this. And again, the term that we use is the future security is open. And I totally agree with that. And the rationale between that is, look, if there's external actors, if we have a common set of rule sets to be able to share, capabilities, so then, somebody can build like a machine learning capability to squash all of this, then guess what? We're all the better for it. All of our security projects would be even better in any project that are out there. So if companies like Dynatrace, Sumo, whomever they might be, can take these libs right now, they're open source, it's a CNCF project, take them and already have the basis to enhance all that security capability that's there. That to me is the beauty of open source.
And let me ask you, you didn't start in security, right?
So I was a director of IT for an investment software company. So I did a lot of, compliance for data centers, network level, in dissemination, sysadmin, that type of thing. So I have, that basis for it. Right. So, but
I was going to ask if somebody is interested in it, like myself personally, I'm someone interested in security. I think this is something that is way overlooked. As we've seen even just recently with the pipeline issue. I remember going back, we'll take a trip down memory lane again, you and I, back to the New York City blackout back in the early 2000s, right? I remember back then thinking, people don't need to terrorize by knocking down buildings or planes anymore. You could just take down a power grid or a pipeline or something else, right? So security is huge, huge, huge. It's way overdue. But if somebody is interested in, I know there's a lot of different aspects in security, but if someone is interested, curious, do you have any recommendations on where to start looking, maybe things to start thinking about, things to start reading, or blah, any kind of, because there's a lot of concepts in security, but what if you were to guide someone?
And that's the thing. I talked to Alyssa Miller, who's a amazing expert out there, on my podcast yesterday, actually. And so that's what's fresh in my mind right now. There was over 50,000 jobs created for security only in the US, 50,000, right? And so if you look at that, it's not just one specific space. There could be, different places. There's incident response, right? There's, cloud native security. There's cloud security. There's CSPM and all of that. So the question then becomes is, where do you start? And again, I'm going to mention big shout out to Alyssa. She wrote this book, and it's a security guidelines book that she wrote. And it's I'll get a link for you all. Yeah, okay. Because I thought it just provides not only where you start, but also how to brand yourself in a specific way for a specific segment. But I mean, there's a ton of cloud security podcasts out there. But I would say is, get involved, understand red team, blue team stuff, understand attacks, understand the mind of external actors that are trying to, go up against things. Be part of, we have a project in the CNCF, which I'm an ambassador for, is it's called Tag Security. We welcome people coming in and understanding this, but having this basis of understanding the attack surfaces that are out there. Hey, if I'm a developer, I know how to compile and drop things in there. That to me is an attack vector. So understanding that, I think the bridge between developers and security is getting less and less because you have to create secure code from the jump, right? And if you're seeing you heard these terms like software supply chain and those types of things, right? You have to think in terms of, is my code vulnerable? And then if I'm running it at a runtime perspective, what do I have to protect myself? And to me, I believe, yet again, rounding us out, Falco is the de facto tool for that.
Have you, are you working with the chaos engineering community at all? Because this sounds for me like perfect. Because as a developer, I want to get my new service properly tested and then also put under chaos. And chaos infliction could also mean, let's do some secure, I don't know, whatever, try to expose some vulnerabilities and then making sure that my security scanning tool can detect these things that shouldn't happen, and then kicking the auto remediation, kind of the system healing itself.
There's these signals already out of the box. I think, there's, I don't know, Gremlin, there's some other like open source tools that are out there.
Yeah.
Litmus Chaos, another good choice. But again, this is another capability for you to run chaos against, right? Like meaning, and we have something like an event generator that's generating all the things that the rules would have been attacked for, but then also you can create a custom rule set there as well. So it's, again, it's really, based on like, the end results. Now, if anybody from Litmus Chaos who's listening to this wants to, take a look at Falco, please be our guest, join our Kubernetes channel. So we have a channel on Kubernetes Slack. It's called Falco. Love to have you in.
Yeah, because that would be good, because we, from the captain side, we've just integrated with them, and we get a lot of great response in terms of deploying a container, running load against it, and at the same time enforcing chaos. And chaos in this case means, I don't know, killing one of the pods, doing, I don't know, something that causes high CPU memory, and to see how the system reacts and kind of heals itself. And it seems like that the chaos community should then work with the security community to see how they can inflict security chaos, quote unquote, right? Attacks.
And this is what I love about open source.
Yeah.
Vendor to vendor, it's super hard.
Yeah.
Open source, Litmus Chaos.
Yeah.
Falco, Captain.
Yeah.
I relish the fact that I can go talk to the folks they're doing things like, I like what Captain's doing. I was on I was on a I think it was a panel or a meetup with one of the Captain folks, and I was like, this is a great thing. I'd love to see Falco integrated here, in terms of response and stuff like that. So that's where, again, having these talks like you just had now, Litmus Chaos, reach out to us, right? If you want to, but the thing is, if you're going to contribute, it's got to be a reciprocal thing, right? It's like, if you're going to contribute something, it can't just be like where you take. That's the beauty of open source as well, is contribute, adopt, help others adopt versus take, Yeah. And by the way, I put the link to Alyssa's book. So it's called The Cyber Defender's Career Guide. Look, I get nothing from this. I just love how it's very well laid out. And Alyssa's a fantastic resource in the world. Yeah. So is Ian Coldwater. There's many really amazing folks out there.
We'll make sure to put these links later on in the summary so people can click on it once they are on our podcast page. You bring up a good point, because this is one of the other things. You've obviously been hugely successful with the open source project. You have a great blog where you explain how the project grew over the last 2 years, whether in terms of stars, contributions. You have a lot of external contributors. And you just mentioned something, right? The way open source works really well is if everyone is kind of figuring out how to contribute to the other projects by bringing them closer together and building something bigger than the individual pieces. But let me ask you a question. Obviously, there is not one, not two, not 10, maybe there are 50 different projects where you would like to see an integration built. The question is still how, because you have limited resources, how do you still then prioritize? And this comes back to this is the same dilemma that any software organization has and any other organization, right? If I have 50 options and I would love to contribute and build integrations with all of them, how do I best prioritize? Do you have any tips here? Because we run into the same dilemma right now with Captain. We would love to integrate with all of these tools. We encourage people to build contributions or integrations for us, but it's still not easy.
I would say the end users should drive that. Yeah. And what I mean by that is community contribution. It's been A+. Again, we got 6 blogs written by community, not Falco maintainers. 6 in a matter of 3 to 4 weeks. You know how that happened? And another example, Falco Sidekick. There was only standard out JSON, HTTP. Now there's over 32 outputs. You know why? One contributor was like, I like this project so much. And he told other folks and they started contributing. Look, I built this integration that makes it easier, because any project out there that you're working on, it needs to be easy for somebody to jump on and go and then interact. So like, think about it, not only from the user's perspective, it's also going to be easier for another community to go and come in and go, okay, I can see the value of this. I see how this works. Let me tap in my thing here. And the other thing I think that projects don't do, and they need to, is gratitude. Gratitude. When it, like, literally just say thank you. You did this. This is incredible. I constituted something called the Contributor of the Month, and it's voted on in the channel. It's like, and I know of other projects are picking this up as well. I love this fact because we have the groups kind of say, wow, this person took every single blog that's ever been written about Falco and wrote a Git repo for it and shared it. Completely unasked for, completely unsolicited. We made that person Maintainer of the Month. Somebody came in and literally gave us this idea for, overall response engine, and also showed us this amazing UI he had built just for another project. And he basically inspired one of the other contributors to create this new UI that we have in Falco Sidekick now. And this is the beauty of it. Again, it's gratitude. It's showing the community the respect they deserve, because they're taking their own personal time to work on your project. So show them gratitude.
Yeah, I think, and maybe Jürgen, I think you were on the meetup with Jürgen, who showed Captain to you.
Jürgen's fantastic.
He's been taking the Contributor of the Month idea, and maybe he got it from you or from somebody else, but we try to do something similar. We do a Captain User of the Month. We promote them during our monthly user group meetings, because obviously these people are, yes, they're dedicated and hopefully Captain helps them, but still they're taking extra time out of their regular life and building something where other people can benefit from as well. And I think that's great, man. And
the main maintainers are basically almost just shepherds, right? They're basically just helping the shepherd through. Here's how you can do this contribution. But you think about it, like, and I'm seeing a lot of student contribution now. Like after KubeCon, a lot of folks have been involved. They really want to get involved and understand this. So it's a little bit more, but then just that little level of encouragement, and that person just is doing all the things that they can possibly do. And I got to give props to Kubernetes, because I'm a contributor to Kubernetes, right? In terms of this, well, you see the badge here. And I learned that from Kubernetes. I asked when we have a great community from the Falco perspective, but to grow it out, I kind of asked this question. I was like, well, how, of myself, and I had some friends I have in Kubernetes. I'm like, how is it you have this amazing ecosystem that people like want to contribute and people like love doing this and stuff like that? And they said the main thing is what I said to you before. Show the people, contributors, gratitude. Show them that they're respected for the time that they've taken away from their kids. And, maybe, from going out and grabbing even though during COVID, it's been really hard to grab a beer or a non-alcoholic beverage if they're so inclined. You know what I mean? That's the thing we do. And if we can inspire other projects, that's all the better for us, right? We're doing the right things.
Yeah. I think that comes down to the concepts of leadership, right? And I think that's a lot of people don't have those thoughts in mind to just even say thank you for contributing. So that definitely goes a long way. And
what is it? More of that. It's like swag. I mean, sorry to cut you off, Brian, but like it's like swag and stuff like that. It's cool. You send somebody a T-shirt that says Project Contributor. Yeah. It's they can brag about it. It's like they've spent time. It's like they should feel like they deserve that. So yeah.
Yeah. Dan, what else, if people are, let's say, new to security and heard, obviously there's a lot of information about Falco. We can put all the links out there. But are there any 1 or 2 tips that you have for somebody that really wants to make sure to get security right? They're building something for the cloud native space. Besides, looking into Falco, any other tips you can give people as a start?
Yeah. Again, I'm going to go back to the tag security thing I mentioned earlier, because there's a best practices guide that was done, because I told you about that whole overall workflow, right? From your pipeline perspective, your build, your run, your postmortem, your, cloud posture, those type of things. There's best practices for all of those things, right? And there's projects out there in the ecosystem. There's commercial projects out there. So and what I like about this is it lays it out. It tells these were the things that are best practice. This is kind of a simple one sheet that explains this stuff. And that's, if you go to, it's Tag Security. It used to be SIG Security, but it's Tag Security. It's CNCF projects and all that. So that's basically the group that talks about overall project security. So if, think about, Captain or Falco, all those vulnerability assessments that are done, they're done by the Tag Security team, but also that team is, a fantastic group that helps the people to understand what it means to be compliant from a CNCF perspective. Outside of that, from a security perspective, like I said, it's, there's so many avenues right now for them to look at from that perspective. Like I said, I mentioned Alyssa's book is great. A lot of folks on Twitter to follow. There's a podcast to do as well. But I would say, again, is be curious, right? Take a look at these, these capabilities out there from a security perspective and see how they impact you. Not even if you're inclined to be a security person. I'm a developer. I just want to write better code. And to me, better code can also include being more secure.
Mm-hmm. That leads to a question now, obviously, if you have a developer listening to something like this or listening to your own podcast, which make sure we talk about at the end there, how, as organizationally and culturally, how do we start getting developers, or even everybody, but focusing on developers, right? Because a lot of code vulnerabilities. How do we really start getting them to think about security? How do we start getting them to take the time to give a crap about making sure I get security in my codes from day one? Because there's always the pressure. You got to get your code out. You got to get stuff out there. So how do you get a company or an organization to add this to their culture, to adopt this? So
there's traditionally been a security team, networking knock or whatever. There's developers and their operators. Right, exactly.
You got the cops, and then you got everyone trying to have a good time.
But the organizations that work are the one that I've seen that make this work is the security team basically just highlights the overall arching things that need to be secure and do it in a way that's not it's not so much enforcing. So no, you can't check in your code now. They basically say, here's the guidelines when you do check in your code. And there's tools out there, again, that allow you to say, okay, if you do this thing in from a vulnerability management perspective, you shouldn't have root in your containers. Well, guess what? That's just best freaking practice anyway. And if you're getting away with that, then you squeak by. But it's basically, if you do it in a way that's more educational versus slap the wrist all the time, I think that's better. I've seen organizations do that, and also I've seen organizations integrate secure DevOps, DevSecOps, right? That coined that beautiful term, but it's like, if you have the team that understands that if I do check in my code, it needs to be compliant, it needs to be secure, awesome. When I run this at runtime, maybe I have some rule sets using something like Falco, using CIS benchmarks, using things like OPA, Kyverno out there to be able to have this secure posture. If everybody's reading from the same script, that to me is the thing that is the most resonating for it there. But it's, again, like you said, it's cultural. It's a cultural issue. You have to decide, and there's leaders out there, leaders of developers and engineering that are listening to this. You have to decide that, yes, we're going to put our line in the sand, because guess what? It costs us money if we do have a misconfiguration, if we have a security issue. These things get addressed as a culture, not just, I can't go, look, any product out there is going to come tell you we're going to secure all of it. But if you don't have a culture that wants to adhere to that, it's going to mean it's a complete waste of your money.
Yeah. I almost wonder, and this is a topic we don't have to debate, but I almost wonder if there needs to be more of a drive from a regulatory point of view of stricter punishments for companies that have breaches, for when their databases get hacked and everyone's data gets taken away when these things happen, right? Because obviously there's always going to be, from a company point of view, well, how much does it cost to deal with it versus how much does it cost to prevent it? So I think part of it, obviously, if you're going to have your leaders out there who are going to say, we don't want to be in this position. We want to have a good reputation. There's always going to be those who need to be shepherded in. But I think, for better or worse, all of the security breaches we've been seeing lately, it's completely unfortunate that they're happening. But as Andy and I experienced in the performance side, when you start seeing these things hit the news, that definitely helps bring up awareness and get people to think about that. I remember, on the performance side, when both Apple and AT&T crashed on the release of the first iPhone, I finally was able to explain to people what I do. Like I test to make sure that doesn't happen, right? Yeah. And now with security, we're starting to see more and more of these public things. It's really unfortunate. I don't wish it upon anybody, but hopefully this is going to start raising awareness because the writing's on the wall with security.
There was a presidential mandate recently about software supply chain, and looking at this from logistically as a mandate. We need to think about this from a cyber perspective, cybersecurity perspective, but also from, if you think about like ransomware attacks and all that, it's definitely costly money. And the problem, not so much the problem, the thing that we solve. You think about the pieces that we interact with from a distributed computing perspective. There's so many attack vectors.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
there's network. There's host. There's control plane, right? Mm-hmm. There's apps. You have to have a full posture. And if somebody tells you that like the posture is like, it's one of this is going to get you all of it, no, you'll be fine. But it's not only that. It's not just the tools, everyone. It's the culture. The culture needs to say, that's it. From this perspective, this is how we are going to stay compliant, period.
Yeah. And then beyond those aspects, there's also just the aspects of a lot of people might think, well, my system doesn't matter. It's got nothing. I'm not running a pipeline. I'm not running this. But I was just thinking, not necessarily the greatest example, but recently I got a card in the mail from Amazon saying, hey, put your prescriptions to us, right? Not that I would do that. But if you think about, what if someone hacks and takes down Amazon, right? Not Amazon Cloud, but Amazon, the consumer product thing. Well, if they hit the prescription piece, now suddenly you have people not getting the prescriptions, which could be deadly, So I think another thing companies have to do is change their mindset or really think about where they fit in the world. Going back to you, Andy, with chaos engineering, do that mental exercise as if we're out, what happens? If people don't get what we offer, what's the impact of that? And we really need to consider security because of that. I mean, if you're, I don't know, there's probably some people who can be like, yeah, it doesn't matter if I'm up or down, but, I think it is a lot more far reaching than people would think. Supply chain even, right? What we saw with COVID. I'm sorry, I'm going on a soapbox here, but you might think, I'm just a part supplier. Well, if you're down and that breaks down the supply chain later on, look what we saw with all these supply chain interruptions. These things have ripples, and it's such a huge thing. And I just really hope people get into it more. And I really
look at the pipeline thing recently. Like, like that's raising awareness. But again, it's all, you can't think security is one thing. Security is many things.
We had people putting gasoline in buckets. But yeah, no, it's very important, and I really appreciate everything you, Dan, and Falco is doing with this because I think it's just on my mind a lot, because I worry. I'm a worrier.
And you should worry to a certain degree, but like I will tell you this: there's amazing minds working together right now, and not just Falco, which obviously plug for Falco, but there's so many great projects. I mean, I know of one called Sig Store, really cool. From Dan Lawrence is working on that. It's basically like a methodology for like, basically like having your containers be completely secure through like, the private keys and all of that in a pipeline perspective. Really cool project. And, all these things I think will help with the agita that is security. You just need to be aware of what these things are.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, before we close up here, I know you mentioned
I didn't get to plug my podcast, for God's sake. What we're doing here.
That's what we're doing here.
This is all, you guys are all business on the Pure Performance for your podcast.
Yeah, so we're so serious because this is my German in me.
Yes.
There you go. No, so Dan, you mentioned it earlier, and sorry that it took so long, but you happen to have a podcast yourself. Now, what is this all about?
Yeah, I do. Let me tell you a little. Funny should ask. Yeah. Are you all sitting down? Yeah, by the way, follow at Popcast Pop on Twitter. You'll see the details. So it's an audio and video podcast. I started it a year and a month. And basically it's not like full tech. It's really about the people behind the code. And so it's been phenomenal. I love it. The success of it has been great because started it because I wasn't out going to see end users and customers and all my friends in the community, right? It was now it was your room, how can I go talk to some folks and whatever. So I started it, and like I said, it's been great. We had, I think I'm at 70 episodes by 70 by the time that, I don't know if this airs. Yeah, thank you. And I talked to the mainstays of Kubernetes and the CNCF projects and all that. And I'm really excited about the doing it. I'm probably next year going to take it on the road. I'm excited for that as well. So we're going to try to do some remote stuff. Then the other thing I'm working on as well, I'm an executive producer of CNCF is doing it, has a Twitch channel. And the Twitch channel is we're going to do some really cool shows that aren't just technical. They're also technical entertainment. So things we're going to have a Family Feud level show. And it's basically people in CNCF projects will reach out to you from Captain. Maybe Captain wants to be part of this. Basically,
you don't kiss all the guests.
No. I'm not the host. Maddie Stratton is. And so basically going up against each other for trivia dominance and basically having these teams go against each other. And then at the end of the season, they get the CNCF Cup, right? So really cool stuff. And then there's also what's the main thing you see from anybody's oh, I want to contribute to a project. Well, how do I do that live? You have somebody from a project come in and show me how do I contribute to a project, and that show's called looks good to me. So there's a ton of really cool shows.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, we'll make sure to put all the links out there as well.
I think we're gonna have a lot of links on this one.
I think so too. We may need to buy some extra web space for putting all the links on.
We'll buy some more pixels. Dan, we'll follow up with you for an email and all those things, just so we don't lose them from the Zoom. But
I copied it all out. That's
okay,
good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much for enlightening us on the topics that are important for you. Besides security, I think what I learned from you is that you're a really great guy, and we want to make sure to encourage people to contribute, and also encourage everyone that wants people to contribute to show gratitude. And with that, in the end, we'll make the world a better place, a safer place, and a more secure place.
Yes.
Thanks for having me on.
And I have to say, Dan, talking to you made me homesick for good food. Because out in Denver, it's pretty mediocre, but
come back to New York. I'll feed you. It's all good.
I was back there. It was amazing. We were back there for my friend's wedding about a year and a half ago or so, and we took the train down to the old World Trade Center station. Got to see the new one, and then we walked our way up to 33rd over the course of the day and just stopped and ate a bunch of places and saw all the old places. So much has changed, but it's just it's great to have good food, and you probably don't know what you got there until you leave. But it was great catching up with you earlier too. Any last things you wanted to get in before we wrap up?
Nope. Thanks so much. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate the opportunity of talking with you all, and let's do this again at some point, sometime.
Well, thank you for educating us, and thanks for helping educate our listeners. I know Andy and I always love that we get to learn about new topics on this show, so it's always a pleasure for us. And thank you to all of our listeners out there. If anybody has any questions, comments, or ideas for a show, or if you happen to want to be on a show, you can tweet us at pure_DT or send us an old-fashioned email at pure_performance@dynatrace.com. Thanks again, Dan, and as always, Andy, thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.